Hi, everyone. I'm Kat Trago. I'm the Wisconsin ACEDS Chapter President for Wisconsin, and I am thrilled to welcome you to the 2026 edition of the Midwest ACEDS Series. So this year we're focusing on AI, much like many programs. However, we're trying to really focus on what's the current state of use and the current state of AI is. Um, and this year, we're excited that we've expanded our series to include two interactive workshops, a vendor fair, and the ever popular judges panel. Also, new this year, Doug Austin of eDiscovery Today has graciously offered to provide a 5-minute industry update in the beginning of each of our sessions. And today, we're going to start with our first CLE panel, where we'll discuss the evolution of AI and where we are now, with an incredible panel of experts. So thank you to everyone participating today. Next month, we will hear from practitioners who lead the way in weaving AI into their practice. And the series will take place on the fourth Wednesday of each month, going all the way through August. So to register for additional sessions, view course materials, and access the recordings after the sessions, please visit our website. You'll notice that the um, link is on the bottom of the slide, the current slide, and we'll put it in the chat as well. This series is a group effort from members of the Chicago, Denver, Detroit, Ohio, and Wisconsin chapters. A special thank you to Diane Diaz, who from the Chicago chapter, and she took the lead on getting session one off the ground. I also want to thank Jake Bell from NextPoint, who is coordinating our CLE and administrating the credits. So we have applications in Wisconsin, Illinois, Michigan, Ohio, Iowa, Nebraska, Florida, New York, Colorado, and DC. This week, Doug was unable to attend in person, but he did send a recording of his industry update. So we're going to start there, and then we'll turn to National ACEDS President Mike Corderaro to kick off the panel discussion.
Hi, I'm Doug Austin, editor of eDiscovery Today, a daily blog about eDiscovery, cybersecurity, data privacy, information governance, and AI trends, best practices, and case law. Here's your AI trends update. For March 2026 as they relate to legal e-discovery professionals. This month, I'm reporting on trends from the 2026 State of the Industry report published last month by eDiscovery Today. Of course, I should mention that any ideas expressed by me are my own, not those of my organization, clients, or partners. Disclaimers are very trendy. The State of the Industry report is designed to reflect trends and sentiments within the e-discovery community. It's published every year, and this year was the 6th edition of the report. It's comprised of two components: results from an industry-wide survey consisting of 12 questions covering trends in the e-discovery industry, and a cross-section of thought leader observations on those same trends. It's available free to email subscribers of eDiscovery Today, along with every other report and white paper we publish. There are currently available reports at eDiscovery Today. The second one, on evaluating methods for review, is due out at the end of the month. We've targeted 10 to 12 new reports and papers we plan to publish this year. This year, we had a record 559 respondents to the survey and 62 thought leaders providing observations on those same topics. We also had a record number of respondents from corporations and government entities, reflecting a more balanced result than ever. And here's the first trend. We asked a question involving the expected impact of LLMs and Gen AI on eDiscovery solution offerings and workflows in 2026. Over a third, 37.4%, expected to have a transformative effect this year, but another 23.3% believe it's already transformative. That means more than 3 in 5 respondents expect LLMs and Gen AI to be transformative for e-discovery by the end of the year. And here's one of the reasons why. It has many use cases for e-discovery and litigation. More than 40% of respondents said they apply generative AI and LLMs to 7 distinct use cases for e-discovery. That includes everything from document review automation and classification to document summarization, to case strategy and ECA, which jumped about 12% this year, privilege and PII identification, timelines of key events, another 12% jumper this year, translation and depot prep are all used by a significant number of respondents. Every use case was up over last year, reflecting greater use of the technology. We may be using generative AI, but we're not using it on that many cases, at least not yet. Remember 2 slides ago when I said that 23.3% of respondents said that generative AI is already transformative? Well, only 17.7% of respondents are using it in all or most of their cases. So it appears there's some hype in that first number. I would think if it were truly transformative, they would be using it most of the time, right? Additionally, almost half of respondents, 46.5%, use Gen AI in very few or none of their cases. However, both numbers are improved over last year, the top number by 5.4%, the bottom number by 17.5%. So we are progressing, just not as quickly as everybody thinks we should. Our last trend is the top e-discovery trend for 2026. And big surprise, it's AI. For the third year in a row, increased use of AI technology was the top choice. This year, we added a second AI-related category, discovery of AI-generated content. We thought it would reduce the number for the top AI category a bit, and it did by a whopping 0.7%. Instead, the two AI categories combined for 70% of the total, leaving the other 7 categories to divide up 30%. No other trend received more than 6.6% of the vote for the top e-discovery trend for 2026. That's it for the AI Trends update for March 2026. I'll be back next month with an update on AI hallucinations trends in legal. See you next month, and thanks for having me.
Okay, I guess I'll take it from here. My name is Mike Porteraro. I am the president of ACEDS. Thank you, everyone, for joining the 2026 Midwest series. As Kat pointed out earlier, this will be a series of programs over the next coming months that dive into various artificial intelligence topics. I want to introduce our panel today. We've got a great panel. We're going to talk about, and I should just set the stage by saying that this will be sort of an AI 101 kind of session, but we're going to touch on a couple of more intricate details, but not a deep dive into AI. Our goal is really to just bring sort of a high-level overview to everybody, but we'll get into it in a minute. So why don't we start with Jeff? Tell us who you are, what you do, and what's interesting about this series to you?
Thanks, Mike. I'm Jeff Chivers. I'm a computer scientist and litigator by background. In the last 6.5 years, I've been the CEO and head of product at Silo, which is a e-discovery and litigation platform. And really happy to be here today. I think this series is great in the way it progresses from foundational work that we have today all the way through to more advanced and hands-on subjects in the later stages of the series. Really appreciate being able to participate.
Thank you, Jeff. Julie, you're up next.
Sure. Thanks, Mike. I'm Julie Brown. I'm the Director of Practice Innovation at Voorhees. I just completed my 25th year at the firm. Prior to that, I spent about 10 years in a corporate law department. And prior to that, back in the 80s, I was a paralegal. So been in the industry a long time and super excited about all the cool stuff we get to do today.
Thanks, Julie. And last but by no means least, Paul, please tell us who you are, where you're from.
Well, greetings from Toronto, Canada. I'm at Epic Global, Director of AI Product Management. I do not have the industry background that so many of you do have. I mean, I've been in legal tech, I guess, for about 2.5 years now, but I do have a background in AI technology and machine learning going back to the late 1990s. I was part of the IBM team that built Watson and competed and won on Jeopardy! And since then, I wrote a book, have a number of patents in AI, and now I'm learning how to apply all of what I know around AI and machine learning into the legal industry.
Thank you so much. Thanks to each of you for joining us today, sharing your insights. A quick overview of what we're going to talk about. We did our introductions. We're going to define artificial intelligence. We're going to talk a little bit about agentic AI, some use cases, and how to use AI responsibly. We'll close out with some thoughts and takeaways from our panelists. And with that, why don't we jump in? So I want to begin today with an understanding of artificial intelligence, first as more of an umbrella term and then a little bit more specifically. Paul, let me start with you. Obviously, we have some text on the slide, but what is your definition of artificial intelligence?
It's a good question. And in some regards, I feel like AI, generative AI, these have almost become terms like Kleenex, right? Where they're just sort of used to mean anything to anybody in a very generic sense. In reality, these are different things, right? A convolutional neural network for a image classification is machine learning. Transformer model for token prediction is generative AI. But we've kind of all wrapped these things together. So right now, the way I kind of think of it is leveling up, where AI is a system that responds to an input and gives you the outcome that you're expecting, where you don't necessarily understand or have direct visibility into how it's being processed and how it's, generating or giving you the output. And that's okay, right? We don't always know how people are thinking. We don't always know how the machines are connecting bits and bytes. So to me, AI is really all of these technologies being brought together to deliver outcomes.
Fantastic. Jeff, let's get your take.
Uh, just kind of another way that sometimes I describe machine learning is it's the training of a math equation.
Hmm.
And that may or may not be an appealing way to think about things in the legal industry, but I still think it is useful in the sense that whether it's more traditional machine learning to do things like predict a stock price or predict the weather or to predict the next word in a sentence, like with large language models, underneath the hood, there is a math equation that's taking some inputs and flowing them through variables that have been learned by the system based upon the training data and yielding some outputs. And another reason I like to think about it that way is it protects against the anthropomorphizing of artificial intelligence. And so I think it is a useful way to say, look, a large language model is a exceedingly complex math equation. You give it some inputs, it gives you some outputs. So that's what I would add to it.
And Julie, I want to get your thoughts too. And I want to come back to another question, and it's just sort of a follow-up, and that is this still zeros and ones like we were taught in the 1980s? We'll come back to that, but Julie, your thoughts.
Sure. Yeah, so I guess I view it as, artificial intelligence has been around a really, really long time. And we look at originally how they were able to program um, computers to beat somebody at chess, right? And make decisions, yes or no. And then we evolved into what, at least in the e-discovery business, machine learning, when we started using TAR and we had humans in the loop training the algorithms to go predict what was responsive and what wasn't. And to me, the huge difference with generative AI is the ability to actually create content now, and create it better than most humans. So to me, that's the big differentiator for what we've seen today.
Great, thanks, Julie. And so, Paul, to my zeros and ones question, what do you think?
Fundamentally, yes, right? Fundamentally, we're still talking about data. We're still talking about bits and bytes, ones and zeros. I'm sure, that there's things that are just fundamentally true and inescapable. I remember actually, I'm not in my home office. If I could flash it up. I have a book that was, or sorry, a master's thesis written on using artificial intelligence to provide better outcomes for fighter pilots, autonomous AI for fighter pilots. So, master thesis written in 1972. So, this isn't really new in many respects. And I think that's important to recognize that some of the things, as Jeff said, it's all math. And as Julie said, it's ones and zeros. So, that is true. What isn't what I guess what's changed is the way that we understand how to process vast volumes of data at speeds that we couldn't conceive of even, frankly, 6 months ago, and deliver outcomes that nobody really expected we would be able to do. That's the big difference.
All right, let's get into a little bit of a timeline here. And so, as a concept, as AI has been around for decades, it's not new. We've all seen this evolution over the years from TAR to advanced analytics and now generative AI. Julie, how would you characterize the evolution we've witnessed? Is this progress or just more of the same?
I think it's progress, and I really think if you look at user adoption rates, it kind of tells the story. So TAR 1.0 had a really rocky start, right? Even though the courts came out and kind of approved it, people still couldn't really wrap their heads around it. We had really low adoption rates. And even in today's world, TAR 1.0 probably doesn't get used nearly what it could have back in the day. And then we went into continuous active learning, and still, I think we had better adoption with that, but we never got the level of adoption we're seeing now with generative AI. And when we think about generative AI being out since 2020, November 2022, so almost 2023, right? When we all started really playing with it. Um, that's only 3 years ago. And if you look at the volume of products on the market, like Jeff's, and you look at these teams and law firms and corporations that have been created to focus on generative AI and how do we build tools, how do we build agents, how do we, you know, figure out how to leverage this technology. And it's not just IT people. I mean, we're seeing attorneys in some cases build their own agent, right? So it's a technology that is so easy to use that it's got a really low entry barrier, which isn't what we've seen in the past.
Yeah, I think that's kind of key. And I want to turn to Paul. Really, Paul, get your thoughts on the timeline and the evolution we're witnessing.
Take myself off mute. So Julie's right. I mean, we all got entranced by, frankly, what I refer to as an advanced haiku generator round about the end of November, early December, 2023. Since then, a bunch of things have happened that are really important to understand in this evolution. One of them is the volume of data that the systems are able to, incorporate into their foundation, right? Foundation models is dramatically increased. It's radical in terms of the volume of information. The second thing is the vendors of the foundation models, the OpenAIs of the world, the Anthropics of the world, the AWS with Nova, right? These organizations aren't investing just in faster, better training. They're investing in the pipeline around it. When we were generating haikus about goldfish around Christmas in 2023, we were very far away from the place where you could upload a picture and say, is there a Nike logo in it? So what
Hmm.
we're seeing is this convergence of all of these ML and AI technologies, speech to text, text to speech, video generation, image analysis, translation being brought together into this single pipeline that can be orchestrated just with one input option, right? You just drag and drop in a file and say what you want. That really, to me, This evolution from 2010, it's been, steps, and now it's accelerating up and to the right in terms of the capabilities. And it's all based on the pipeline and the processing that the models are capable of.
Appreciate that. Thank you, Paul. And sort of keeping with our evolutionary theme here, I want to turn to you, Jeff, because here, this slide memorializes the evolution of AI over just the last couple of years. Can you walk us through the developments here that seem to lead us up to this world of agentic AI?
Absolutely. This slide is, there's a lot of content, but if we start on the left-hand side in the first column with standalone LLM, that's really what the original ChatGPT was. To Paul's point, you could log into it, you could type some stuff, you could get a response, and it was a pretty raw interaction between the user putting text into a large language model and getting stuff out. And it wasn't connected to databases, there wasn't site checking, and it was rife with hallucination and factual weaknesses. So then it became, all right, well, let's give a text input in the form of a prompt and also give the LLM some documents to include as part of its context. And that became, less hallucination, but still pretty limited in scope because it's a human that needs to craft the prompt, upload the documents, and get some pretty narrow scope outputs from that. Well, what about when you want to prompt across a much bigger data set? So then you get into retrieval augmented generation, where the user is typing in a query and the system is transforming that into searches and then searching across a bigger corpus, bringing back some of the documents, and then putting that subset of documents through an LLM and providing back a summary or a question response. Well, that's tricky then, because what if the system doesn't retrieve all of the right documents? It retrieved 100 or 200, but it was retrieving that from a million. So you still have a really huge risk of false negatives in that situation. So then we want to think of more guided workflows. So maybe we don't want to just rely on the LLM to find the right 200 documents. We want to do more guided workflows of, we have a million documents, let's segment them down into a certain number of issue coded segments, or otherwise kind of break it down to a smaller chunks so that then you can do retrieval augmented generation on that. Or then you can show just those 100 documents and use like technique number 2 on the screen. And that's kind of becoming more of a mainstay of how AI is being used. And then it leads into the agentic AI kind of approach, where the AI itself is performing the planning as to, instead of a guided workflow by the users, the AI is coming up with its own workflow that it can follow and then execute across any universe of documents. And it manages its own context throughout that process. And that's, I think, kind of where we are now in regard to the kind of cutting edge of applying generative AI to not just legal, but to many, many domains.
And if you could, Jeff, just could you help explain for our listeners what's going on here?
Yeah, so what makes AI agentic? Agentic AI still uses generative AI. Just to sort of say that, maybe it's obvious, but when folks say it's an agentic AI, it's really an application of a generative AI large language model. But instead of having the large language model summarize a document, you have the large language model do fairly specific actions, and that amounts to agentic behavior. And so having a large language model operate by planning, choosing an action, performing the action, making observations, like the action it performed is to run a search and then look at the search results, make observations on them, and then update its knowledge in some way, and then evaluate where it is in executing on the plan, and then choosing the next action, and on and on and on. And it can just keep going. And that dynamic and recursive behavior is really what makes it an agentic process as opposed to just a generative AI process. And Paul may be able to also expound.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
I want to turn to Paul. And Paul, I want to ask you just additional
For
thoughts,
Julie.
obviously, but also, is there an example you could give to our listeners of agentic AI?
Yeah, for sure. So, one thing I want to expand on here is, I agree with everything that Jeff was talking about. I agree with everything that's on the slide. I would add to it, the concept of memory is super critical. So, the agent needs to remember what it's been doing over the course of time and what it did previously. So that's a really important, component when you're building agents or working with agents. The other two things are security, right? You don't want an agent acting necessarily autonomously and deleting things.
Mm,
And that feeds into the human in the loop, where people like me who build agents, and I'm not going to share my screen, but you could see in the background, I've got agents writing code for me right now. And it's probably stopped and it's asking me a question saying, are you sure you want me to do this? And that's, the nature of work today, right? So that human in the loop aspect is also really, really important. And those are things that you have to teach the agent that, before you unleash it or start to really use it in a production sense. Which, to give you an example of an agent in the real world, I built an agent for myself because I was tired of going into the relativity and epic discovery interfaces, creating workspaces, creating projects, loading data, doing translation, doing all that other OCR and all that stuff. It's a lot of work, and I'm lazy. I don't like to do, I put a huge amount of effort into not doing work. So I built an agent for myself that works through Claude Cowork, and I can just say, create me a workspace in Relativity, name it, give it a name, give it a location where the documents exist, and I say process everything so I can start to work with it. And what happens in the background is the agent goes through and it creates the workspace, it loads the documents, and it immediately starts to use different generative AI features to do OCR, to do translation. I don't have to do anything. I just watch it go through and it figures out, oh, this is the tool I need, this is how it works, this is the permissions I need. And if it ever hits a problem where it's an unexpected input, unexpected output, it breaks out of that and says, hey, I found an MP4. What do you want me to do with that? You didn't tell me. Right. So that's an example of an agent in action where the human gets brought into the processing loop.
appreciate that. Julie, anything to add?
I don't think so. I mean, I think this is definitely it's here already, but it's also the next place that most firms are going right now.
Fantastic. All right, let's get into some of the nitty-gritty. We've talked a little bit about some of these already, but I think it's worth emphasizing what some of these terms mean. Paul, can you describe the difference between what we call AI and what is known as artificial general intelligence?
Yeah, that's a great one. Some would argue we're there. In fact, I don't know if you noticed, but recently the guy who coined the term AGI came out and said, yeah, where we are is basically what I meant. It understands user intent and it delivers an outcome that's reasonably consistent with that intent. I don't think there's any one definition for most of these things. I always, I look at these slides like this, and I've created them myself. I'm like, geez, we like our acronyms, don't we? It's almost like we want to use those to make ourselves feel special. Um, but to me, really the difference is AGI is a type of AI where it doesn't only understand the intent and deliver an outcome, but it can correct you and say, no, wait, did you really mean? Right? Where it's actually able to take in context that you don't have and bring that to the forefront and help make the decisions. This is not autonomous. This is, I guess, Siri that works, lack of a better phrase, right? And she just turned on, so we'll turn her off. That's conceptually, I feel like that's the big difference. Where AI is just the big bucket term, AGI is that next step where it's bringing context to the table to help make the outcome better than you thought it could be.
And the robot apocalypse, right?
Well, I for one am here for our robot overlords.
Jeff, help us understand how phrases like machine learning, deep learning, natural language processing, neural networks, how do these all tie together and relate to one another in the work that is being done in the legal industry?
Sure. So I'll start with natural language processing because I think that's a term that has been around quite a long time and is a broad umbrella term about the processing by machines of natural language, where natural language is language used by humans as opposed to language traditionally used by machines like computer code, assembly code, and that type of language. And so natural language processing, really broad term. Lots of techniques that don't even rely on machine learning could fall under natural language processing, like the syntactic parsing based upon rules, for example, might fall under natural language processing. And then when we think about machine learning, that too is a very broad term to describe the process of a machine that learns a math equation from observations in data. Just a really broad term to describe like a computer program that learns patterns from data as opposed to a computer program that operates based upon the hard-coded logic that computer programmers put into it. And then within machine learning, deep learning refers to a technique that's used to really amplify machine learning to a much bigger scale and complexity. And deep learning relies on a neural network architecture. So the neural network architecture refers to the underlying architecture of a deep learning system, and it's modeled roughly on the human brain, which is where the sort of neural network brain kind of concept comes from. And out of that process of deep learning over huge corpuses of text and video and audio come these generative AI models that embody this truly incredibly complex mathematical equation that can map just about any text input to fairly reasonable and useful outputs.
It's really good information. Thank you. And Julie, I want to turn to you last. Because you are working in a law firm, I think many of our listeners today, who I'm guessing are from law firms, would want to know, is TAR more useful or functional than generative AI that we're seeing today for something like document review? I wanted to get your thoughts around that while we're talking about these acronyms.
Yeah, I think it's hard to say in some ways, right?
The jury is still
Because,
out.
well, if you look at it, especially historically, for like the tagging of documents and classification using generative AI, there's a charge for it, right? Where with Cal PAR 2.0, oftentimes there's no charge to leverage that. So what I've heard is in some cases it's more of a hybrid approach where people are using maybe some of those tagging suggestions to build the training set or the seed, and then flipping it over to a more traditional Cal to avoid a per doc charge. Now that's changing quickly, and some providers are now saying, no, 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 we're not going to charge for that. So I think that's going to change the landscape dramatically. The other thing I would add is, now we have products like, well, in Everlaw, it's called Deep Dive, but I think other products are going to have the same thing, which is you're able to search across millions of documents and find the most responsive documents. And, the reason we then turn to Cal or TAR is for defensibility, right? We're looking for the recall and precision in the F1 so that we can demonstrate that we did a reasonable job. I really hope at some point in the future those kind of go by the wayside and we actually can do some other kind of validation without turning to predictive coding or Gen AI tagging to identify the responsive documents. But we'll see. Who knows?
Yeah, I think that's valuable, and then obviously it's developing in real time in front of our eyes, and we'll have to see where it goes. It also makes sense, everyone, to understand how different legal professions may use or rely upon artificial intelligence tools. Julie, while we've got you, how would you describe the difference between how an in-house legal team may use AI versus how a law firm may use it?
Sure. I don't know that there's a ton of differences right now, other than they might be evaluating law firm performance. They're using some generative AI tools, and so the legal ops side of the house might be using it for some different things. But I feel like we're all in the amazing race right now, and we're all charging forward, trying to figure out how do we solve problems leveraging this new technology. And we're all trying out new products that are on the market, bringing them in-house, um, kind of really playing with these tools to figure out what the capabilities are and how far we can go. So I kind of feel like everybody in the legal industry is kind of in that boat right now. I do think, like, for my department, it has even expanded our role more and more into the all practice groups in the firm. So where we developed a lot of expertise in the e-discovery space, we're now able to take a lot of that and uh, leverage that across all of the practice groups in the firm. So we find ourselves working in a lot of different practice groups at this point.
And Paul, you work at a service provider. What is your company, and if you know other companies like yours, what is your company doing to help customers understand this context and the different use cases?
It's an exploratory thing, I think, for most people. Julie sort of touched on that specifically. Before diving in a little bit further, there was a question in the Q&A around, how can you let Claude access relativity? To be clear, it accesses based on my behalf. Think of it as my agent acting on my behalf under my orders. So if you look in the audit trail, it says Claude on behalf of Paul O'Hagan, and it's using my Okta, SSO credentials, and it's acting on my behalf. So I just want to make it really clear that it's not some random access agent doing random things, clicking on random buttons. And loading data is a copy paste activity with extra steps, right? It's not, you're not required to analyze in depth the data and do something you may not want it to do, to copy data from a file share and load it into a workspace. So anyway, I think that that's actually a really good sidebar that explains where I find the context matters. The context around the security, the operations, the visibility, the transparency, everything to do with the actioning with AI is, where most of the organizations I'm talking to are most focused on and want to understand, right? What is my risk profile? What is this going to do? How is it going to work? How do I know what it's done? And these are not really different questions than we ever had with junior employees at any stage of, the growth of the industry. It's just a different type of employee or a different type of way of working with the information. The other thing that I've noticed is little bit outside of the context here, ha ha ha. We see big auditing companies. I can't remember the name of them. The name of the one in particular came out and said, "Hey, we're publicly traded, and here's how we managed to save all this money with our auditors." Well, needless to say, everyone went back to them and said, "Well, if you're saving that money, we want to save that money too," and it's created this downward pressure, price pressure, right? And I think we're going to see that all over the place. Software engineering, and anything to farming is going to be one of them. It will be one of them. It's going to be all over the place in terms of, this downward price pressure and this focus on outcome-based models.
Yeah, I appreciate that, Paul. And Jeff, you've actually developed software that incorporates artificial intelligence. Is the goal to cater to all three of these segments? Is the approach similar for each, or is it different for each? And how do we make that differentiation?
Well, I think to Julie's point, I think we're in a stage of a lot of exploration and validation and evaluation across all of these sectors of the e-discovery and legal industry. And I think as a result of that, there's just a lot of uncertainty as to where that's all going to land. And at the same time, I think everybody knows that this technology is powerful enough that it's going to have a substantial influence on what each person in the legal ecosystem does day to day. And they also know it's going to have significant influence over business models as well. And I would call that just like a perfect storm of FUD, fear, uncertainty, and doubt.
Mm.
And I'd say as a result of that, there's just a whole lot of sort of early signs of sort of patterns emerging in regard to what's going to be done at service provider level, what's going to be done at law firm level, what's going to be done at corporate level. And I'd say that that has not stabilized yet to the point where I can even say with great confidence, like how our particular platform will be used by different parts of it. And I realized that I didn't really answer the question, but I think that's where we are. There's just
No,
so
and
much
that's fine.
uncertainty swirling around. It kind of needs to stabilize over the next year or two.
Totally fine. And I would add to, I'd actually add another segment, and that's academia, because the amount of research and development that's going on in academia is massive right now. And I think some of our best inventions come out of academia. But let's move on and talk a little bit about some of the tools that are out there. Here are the more common text and image generation tools. Paul, is there some secret that everybody needs to know to use these tools effectively? Is one better than others for specific things? What's been your experience?
Yeah, don't don't tell it how to think. Tell it what the outcome is that you want. And I'll give you an example. Jeff, what color's your car? You know the answer, right? Whatever, blue. Jeff, what color's your car? Blue. So you gave me the same answer twice. Both times it was correct. But if I could look inside your brain, the little electric, impulses that are going on and synapses that are firing and axons and everything else, they're going to fire in a different order every single time. Right. So the workflow in your brain to give the right answer blue is always going to be different. So when you're working with this type of technology, something that's hard to understand but really critical is don't be prescriptive about how to do the work. Be prescriptive about what you want the output or the result or the outcome to be. It's a balancing act, and I don't want to say I've got it right. I don't want to say I've seen anybody get it right every time. It's something that I think, it's a journey and we're all on it.
Yeah, appreciate that. And Julie, what's been your experiences? Are some of these tools better at certain things than others? Do you have a preference, or what are your thoughts?
Um, I think it depends on the version of the tool you're using and what you're trying to accomplish. Um, I have to say I use image generators for fun or maybe occasionally a PowerPoint thing, but I don't do image generators very often. Same with these publicly available text generators because we have a secure platform where we're able to upload confidential information and put confidential information in. Um, and it uses OpenAI's ChatGPT 4.1 by default, but we can go up to 5.2, 5.4, and we're getting ready to add Claude to that. So um, I tend to always, it's just my go-to. I go to the platform we have at work because I can ask it the same questions I could a public model, but I don't have to worry about confidentiality. So I tend to do that. So I would say I probably typically use OpenAI for the most part. Most of the things I'm building workflows for. GPT 4.1 seems to do a really good job unless you're doing really, really deep analysis. So um, that's kind of my preference. I haven't played with Claude in that, and I was early on. I was a big fan of Claude when the public tools first came out. So it'll be interesting to see if my opinion changes when using that. But those are some of my thoughts.
Yeah, no, appreciate that. And uh, Jeff, I want to turn to you, but I want to ask you an off-script question here, and that is, Julie mentioned public versus private. Some people say open versus closed. Can you just help our listeners today understand the distinction?
Yeah, I think that those terms are being used differently by different people in different contexts. So I would say there's a decent amount of confusion around that terminology at the moment. But I think what matters most is sort of where is the model running? So that's like a concrete thing you can ask. Where is the model running? Um, whose inputs go into it? And is it being trained on the inputs that are going into it?
And that would be a well, if it was a publicly available, that would be a public model, right?
And I would say if the answer to the third question is yes, like is the model learning from the inputs going into the model, then that is probably a public model, or at least the way that people are using that term is that it is public in the sense that the model operator is training the model on the data that's flowing through it.
And more importantly, I think accessible to the general public.
Um, Accessible to the general public, I think that is also a consideration. The reason I'm not just answering yes is that if you like go into a Google or Amazon or Azure data center and you ask like, which machine is my GPT-5 running on? They would have to say, I believe, it's running on those 500 machines on floor 17,
Hmm.
and they are virtualizing those hardware resources in highly complicated ways at like the actual physical infrastructure level. And so I'll let Paul get a word in. I don't want to get too far down the rabbit hole of all that. I'll pause.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. So, Paul, could you just help us understand that what is a truly private or closed model as opposed to a public model?
There's a lot of confusion in this area, and it really came to light with, I think, DeepSeek originally, where DeepSeek hit the wire. Everyone freaked out. It was amazing, the best model around. And then everyone lost their minds because they realized that it was actually making copies of everybody's input data and piping it off to somewhere they didn't want it to go to. And that caused a lot of drama and excitement. Um, there's a difference between the model and the system that's delivering the model, the framework. So for DeepSeek in particular, there is no security risk in using the DeepSeek model. If there was, you wouldn't be able to use it hosted in Azure, hosted in AWS, hosted in NVIDIA, right? They all provide access to the DeepSeek models. The problem was the framework, deepseek.com, was intercepting the messages and doing something you didn't want with it. So it's really critical to understand the difference between the framework that's hosting the model and the model itself. Transformer models are not something that can do what people were thinking that they could do at that time. And I think there's been some education, but it hasn't been completed in that area. Open and closed models, generally speaking, to me, an open model means something that I can tweak or tailor to my own purposes. So I think of something like Qwen or Llama, where I can do a fine tuning job using something like LoRa or QLoRa, and I can actually add data vectors into the training set data itself and create a new version that is mine, and I can take that and run it myself where I want to run it. A closed model to me, even though they talk about sort of, how you can fine tune and that kind of stuff, you can't really fine tune a GPT model in that way, right? It's fundamentally not the same thing. I can take Quen, I can use LoRa, I could use QLoRa, I could add, I could create my own Q&A pairs, I could do all sorts of stuff. I can create a fine-tuned version and I can pick that up. And yes, I have a lab at home with a bunch of GPUs, right? Of course I do. But I could pick that up and I could run it in my home office and nobody could ever touch it except me. To me, it's open because I can do that.
Gotcha. Okay.
And
And just
Mike, for
go
just real
ahead, Julie.
quick for us in a law firm, what it typically means, and when I say it's private versus public or closed versus open, it typically involves an enterprise agreement with that product, and where you've opted out of abuse monitoring because you don't want people outside your law firm reviewing documents that you've uploaded. So typically I'm not a security expert. We have a team of people that do that, thank goodness. But any product we use that the firm says is safe for use goes through a full-blown security audit and ongoing monitoring to make sure it meets with the standards.
Absolutely. And so no conversation about artificial intelligence today is complete without some discussion of the risks associated. Before I do that, really quick housekeeping item. For anyone seeking CLE credit, we're offering credit in a number of different jurisdictions. What you'll need to do is type in the chat directed to Jake Bell. And it's okay if you don't get this exactly right. Directed to Jake Bell in the chat in the drop down. Type in the chat your name, your state, and your bar number, and that will go a long way towards getting you the CLE credit that you've sought. Okay, back to the presentation. So we're going to talk a little bit about risk. It's important to understand where, when, and how things can go sideways. I'm sure we've all seen the lawyers who have been sanctioned for using imaginary cases to support legal arguments. Jeff, on the risk of the risks on the slide, what really stands out to you as the most important to mitigate?
I think that the concerns that Julie just raised are probably the place to start. And those are, is the model training on my data? Because if it is, that creates the risk of disclosure of confidential information. Is the model under a zero data retention and exclusion from abuse monitoring? Those to me all relate to protecting confidential information. And I think that's kind of the bedrock of thinking about risks around AI, is starting from first principles of almost all the data that goes into a legal software is confidential or has to be presumed to be confidential. And so viewing it from the risk of confidential disclosure standpoint, to me, is first principle, number one. And then when you get into the accuracy and validation piece of things, that is where, yes, we've definitely seen lawyers get in trouble with that. And I don't think that risk is going away, even as the systems get better. There absolutely needs to be a human in the loop and site checking and validation that's appropriate for the way that the AI tool is being used. I would point to those two categories of risks as the ones that are occupying the most mind share at the moment, at least based upon the conversations and questions that I'm hearing.
And listen, just for the sake of time, I gotta save a little bit of time here. Julie, I want to turn to you just to amplify, because you work mostly with lawyers at a law firm. Are the ethical implications becoming easier for lawyers and legal professionals to navigate?
Um, I don't I won't say they're easier. I think one of the key pieces we always emphasize is validation. I mean, it is just the most important thing when we're leveraging generative AI models, and partly because it can sound so convincing that it's correct,
Mm.
um, that the attorney says, "Oh, it answered correctly, and I don't have to look at it." And I think when I look going forward, is I feel like if the models continue to get better and better and better and better and better, is it going to build a false sense of security for the legal profession, to where they feel like after you've checked something 100 times and there's no mistakes, are you going to keep checking it? So I feel like that is the biggest issue right now. Ethically, we started out having clients say, "Do not use generative AI on my stuff," kind of thing, and that's kind of slacked off to where, and now we have clients saying, "You must use generative AI, and by the way, tell me how you're using it." So I feel like that's probably the biggest change we've seen from the onset into the last year, is really being asked to use generative AI more often than not.
And Paul, we have to talk about deepfakes a little bit. And just for anyone who knows, we've got a workshop on this coming up, but just wanted to spend some time thinking about how do we identify deep fakes? Like, this is a real problem.
It is, and it's the arm race of the current generation, right? I mean, just the one of my favorite ones is what's his name eating spaghetti, right? I mean, just when we think back to the original videos of and where we've come and how far we come, this is well and truly an arms race. I don't think there is one good answer. A lot of the big vendors out there, they will slap metadata in that makes it very easy to identify, hey, this is an AI generated or augmented image. But thanks to, being able to run a lot of this stuff locally at home on your own, you don't have to do that. And that can make it extremely difficult to determine. I don't have a magic answer for this. This is one of those things where we have to put on our critical thinking hats, and education is the best answer right now. There are some signs, but every time we figure out, ooh, this is a good way to tell it's a deep fake, everyone rushes and says, "Oh, thanks for that," and fixes it.
All right, so let's wrap up here a little bit with a little talk about the use cases. Let's share some practical knowledge. On the slide is a very selective list that we just sort of made up. And I want to ask each panelist what stands out to you as the most effective, most productive, most useful use case, and why. And let's start with Jeff.
I hate to dodge a question, but I think my answer really is it's the gestalt. It's the sum of all the things that's what's really incredibly
Hey, that's an
overwhelming.
answer, dude.
Is like it's everything.
I know.
It's like almost every workflow you could imagine, there's a potential application of AI in it, and it's the sort of exploration period that we're in of figuring out whether these are even workflows that we think about in the future, because some of them get fully automated, other ones emerge. I think it's that level of dynamism and AI in everything, the way that this is rolling out. I
Great.
dodged
Julie,
a bit,
Julie, your
but
thought.
Yeah, I agree with Jeff, all of the above. I'm seeing a lot of focus on the contract or agreement analysis, M&A work. So there's certainly a lot of that. Um, I, when we look at e-discovery, I think, everything from drafting motions and discovery and all kinds of things in addition to just e-discovery. There's just all kinds of implications to the entire workflow. So I think uh, one of my favorites probably is maybe case strategy and analysis, actually looking across documents and figuring out, asking, kind of brainstorming with the platform on uh, what's key in the case or what I should be focused on. Those type of things I think it does really well. But yeah, I think a lot of this, I think for clients, for the corporations, figuring out to lower their risk and mitigate their risk up front so they don't have lawsuits and they don't have to hire law firms, figuring out how to use or leverage generative AI across their data for that purpose.
And Paul, if I could just ask you your thoughts on use cases, but we are pretty close to time, so I want to ask you to incorporate your closing thought.
Yeah, no, I think so. Yes. From a use case perspective, I would agree with everything both Jeff and Julie said. I would add the thing that excites me is that there's some kid in grade 9 and she's growing up in a world that's native to this, and she's going to have use cases that none of us in this meeting have ever even considered or thought of. And that to me is wildly exciting. I can't
Yeah.
wait for it. And to me, that also dovetails into my closing thought, right? Which is we're on a journey and we're not exactly sure where we are, except we know it's at the beginning. So we need to remember not to lose sight of some first principles that really matter, which is, in my world, the security, the privacy, the transparency of what it is that we're doing. I enjoy playing around and doing things that don't make any sense to most people, but I do that in a very compartmentalized way. There's a difference between the product, what you bring out in product and how you use it in the real world, and how, some of us mad scientists work in the back room as well.
Jeff, your closing thought.
I echo that, and I would say we're still early in the 10 to 20 year period where AI transforms everything about our lives. Still early. Um, but it is going to happen, whether I or anybody else wants it to happen. I definitely would say that given this is kind of an introduction and AI 101 course, I just want to say it like this is going to be a massive transformation of e-discovery, legal, every other industry. If you're still kind of on the fence of is this really as big as the hype masters say it is, I would try to do more research and do more hands-on experience so that you can get past that because it really is transformative and it's going to be a huge learning curve for everybody. Everyone has to go through it. And I don't think there's a way. So we're all back in school, whether we want to be or not, with respect to like learning this whole new way of doing things.
And Julie, your closing thought, please.
These are super exciting times. I mean, I don't know if I've ever had a time in my career where I've had an opportunity as big as this to actually learn new things, develop new things, be part of the change. So I would just say to everybody, if you haven't gotten on board, get on board. It's going to be a great ride and lots of opportunity in this area.
Thank you. I know we had some questions and we've dealt with them as we go. Unfortunately, we don't have time for questions, but just a reminder to everybody. First of all, thank you for attending. Thank you to our panelists, Julie, Jeff, Paul. Thank you for the chapter leaders around the Midwest for coordinating, organizing all this. And thank you, of course, to NextPoint for sponsoring the CLE credit for this and our other sessions. Have a great day, everyone. Great to see you. And as I always say, be kind to one another. Kat, back to you.
Apologies, I couldn't find the mute button. I just want to close by saying thank you very much to Jeff, Julie, and Paul for participating today, and Mike, as always, for doing such a fantastic job of moderating. I did put in the chat a registration link for our next session where it's entitled AI in Action, and we're going to have another CLE panel of practitioners who are going to talk about how they're actually incorporating AI into their daily life. So, without any further ado, thank you all. Again, this will be recorded and loaded onto our website, um, as well as the slide deck and any other materials that you might need for CLE submissions. Thank you again.
Thanks,
Have a
everyone.
wonderful day.
Thank you.
Thanks, Kat.